In 1913, I was at the height of my career. I had been Sigmund Freud's most promising disciple, his crown prince, as he called me. Together, we were revolutionizing the understanding of the human mind. But beneath this success, something was rotting. I began having disagreements with Freud, fundamental disagreements about the nature of the unconscious, about sexuality, about the purpose of psychotherapy itself. Freud believed everything came down to repressed sexual desires. Every dream, every symbol, every neurosis traced back to sex. But my research with patients, my own inner experiences, told me something different. I saw in the human psyche something far more vast, far more ancient, and far more mysterious than sexual repression alone could explain. When I finally broke with Freud in 1913, I didn't just lose a mentor. I lost my anchor to reality. I was 38 years old, with a wife and 5 children, a thriving practice, and a respected position in the medical community. And yet, I felt myself slipping into an abyss. I began having visions. The first one came in October of 1913. I saw Europe flooded by a terrible catastrophe. I saw a sea of blood covering the northern and low-lying lands between the North Sea and the Alps. The vision repeated again and again. I saw yellow waves, floating rubble of civilization, and countless drowned bodies. Then the entire sea turned to blood. I thought I was going insane. Was this a prophecy? A hallucination? A psychotic break? When World War I began in August 1914, I understood that something within me had sensed a collective catastrophe before it manifested in reality. But this realization didn't comfort me. It terrified me. If the unconscious could see things my conscious mind couldn't, what else was lurking beneath the surface? I made a decision that most psychiatrists would consider professional suicide. I decided to deliberately submit myself to the impulses of the unconscious. I would stop resisting. I would stop rationalizing. I would let whatever wanted to emerge from the depths come forth, and I would document everything. This was the beginning of what I would later call active imagination. But at the time, it was simply surrender. I began a practice of sitting quietly and allowing images to surface from my unconscious. But these weren't gentle meditative visions. These were violent, chaotic, terrifying encounters with aspects of myself I had spent my entire life denying. One December afternoon in 1913, I decided to let myself drop. I imagined myself sinking into the earth, falling through layers of consciousness into the unknown. Suddenly, I landed in a cave. There was a dwarf with a leathery skin, as if he were mummified. I squeezed past him and waded through icy water to the other side of the cave, where I saw a glowing red crystal. As I lifted it, I discovered a corpse beneath it, a youth with blonde hair and a wound in his head. Then came a scarab beetle, and finally a red sun rising from the depths. This was not a dream. I was fully awake, sitting in my study, yet these images possessed a reality more vivid than the furniture around me. The visions continued. I encountered a figure I called Elijah, an old prophet with a commanding presence, accompanied by a blind woman named Salome. These figures spoke to me, argued with me, challenged me. Elijah told me things about the nature of God and the human soul that my conscious mind would never have formulated. Later, Elijah transformed into a figure I called Philemon, an old man with the wings of a kingfisher. Philemon became my inner teacher, my guide through the unconscious. He possessed knowledge I did not have. He said things I did not think. He taught me that there are psychic contents within us that have their own life, their own agency, their own intentions. This was a shocking revelation. We like to believe we are unified, that I am one coherent self, making conscious choices. But Philemon showed me otherwise. Within each of us are multiple personalities, multiple voices, multiple selves. many of which operate completely outside our conscious awareness. The most disturbing of these inner figures was what I began to call the shadow. I encountered him in various forms during my descent. Sometimes he appeared as a primitive man, savage and violent. Other times as a criminal, a trickster, a fool. He embodied everything I consciously rejected about myself. My aggression, my selfishness, my cruelty, my lust for power, my destructive impulses. One particularly vivid encounter stands out. I was exploring an inner landscape when I came upon a medieval castle. Inside, I found a knight in black armor. When I approached, he removed his helmet, and I saw my own face, twisted with malice and contempt. He laughed at me and said, "You think you're so civilized, so enlightened, but I am you. I am the part you hide from others, the part you hide from yourself. I am your shadow, and you cannot kill me, because I am already you." This was the moment I truly understood. The shadow is not something external to us. It is not the devil tempting us from outside. It is the devil within, the collection of all the traits, desires, and impulses we deem unacceptable, and therefore repress into the unconscious. Through these confrontations, I began to formulate a theory of the shadow that would become central to my psychology. The shadow, as I came to understand it, is the unknown dark side of our personality. It contains all the uncivilized desires and emotions that are incompatible with our chosen conscious attitudes and social standards. Everything our conscious mind finds morally objectionable, socially unacceptable, or personally shameful gets pushed down into the shadow. But here's what most people don't understand. The shadow isn't just negative. It also contains positive traits we've suppressed because they didn't fit our self-image or because we were taught they were inappropriate. For instance, a man raised to be always gentle and accommodating might have suppressed his healthy aggression, his ability to assert boundaries, his competitive drive. These positive masculine qualities then become part of his shadow, erupting occasionally in passive-aggressive behavior or sudden, inappropriate outbursts. A woman taught to always be nice and nurturing might have suppressed her ambition, her anger, her sexual desires. These qualities don't disappear. They sink into the shadow, where they fester and occasionally explode in ways that shock both her and those around her. The shadow forms early in childhood. As we develop an ego, a conscious sense of I, we simultaneously develop a shadow. Every time a parent says, "Good boys don't do that," or "Nice girls don't feel that way," a piece of our authentic self splits off and sinks into unconsciousness. By the time we reach adulthood, our shadow has accumulated decades of rejected material. It becomes a kind of psychological dumping ground for everything we can't integrate into our conscious self-image. What makes the shadow so dangerous is that we're unconscious of it. We don't see it in ourselves. Instead, we project it onto others. We see in other people the very qualities we've denied in ourselves. The traits we most despise in others are often the ones we've most thoroughly repressed in ourselves. This is why we have such strong emotional reactions to certain types of people. That colleague who seems so arrogant triggers such rage in you, because you've suppressed your own desire for recognition. That person who appears so manipulative disgusts you because you've denied your own capacity for subtle control. That individual who seems so weak repulses you because you've buried your own vulnerability. The shadow is what makes good people do terrible things. It's why upstanding citizens have affairs, why moral leaders embezzle money, why peaceful individuals suddenly erupt in violence. When the shadow accumulates enough energy from being constantly suppressed, it takes over. It possesses us, acting through us, while we convince ourselves we're doing something entirely different. During my years of confronting my unconscious, I had to face my own shadow repeatedly. Let me share some of what I discovered about myself, uncomfortable as it is. I discovered a tremendous will to power within me. Despite my conscious belief that I was serving patients and advancing knowledge, my shadow revealed a hunger for recognition, a desire to be seen as great, perhaps even as a prophet or guru. This realization horrified me because I had always prided myself on humility and service. I discovered a capacity for cruelty. In my inner visions, I sometimes found myself inflicting violence on the figures I encountered. I recognized that beneath my professional compassion was a cold, analytical detachment that could, under certain circumstances, become ruthless. I discovered sexual desires and fantasies that contradicted my role as a respectable husband and father. The shadow doesn't care about social propriety or moral standards. It contains raw, uncivilized libido that exists independent of our conscious values. I discovered a profound selfishness. Despite my work helping others, my shadow showed me that much of my motivation came from self-interest, from building my reputation, from the pleasure of being needed and admired. Most disturbing of all, I discovered a destructive impulse, what Freud called the death drive. There were moments in my descent when a part of me wanted to destroy everything I had built, to burn down my life, to embrace chaos and dissolution. These discoveries were agonizing, but I realized something crucial. By bringing these shadow contents into consciousness, by acknowledging them, I was draining them of their autonomous power. The shadow is most dangerous when we're unconscious of it. When we can say, "Yes, this is also part of me," the shadow loses its ability to possess us completely. This is what I mean by integrating the shadow. It doesn't mean acting on every dark impulse. It means acknowledging that these impulses exist, that they are genuinely part of who we are, and then consciously choosing how to relate to them. I began to understand that psychological wholeness requires embracing the totality of who we are, not just the parts we find acceptable. This was radically different from both religious morality, which says suppress the darkness, and from primitive amorality, which says indulge every impulse. I was proposing a third way, conscious relationship with our darkness. But my discoveries went deeper still. I realized that the shadow isn't just personal, it's also collective. Each culture, each nation, each historical era has its own collective shadow, the unacknowledged darkness of the group. This collective shadow contains all the primitive instincts, all the violent impulses, all the archaic ways of being that civilization has supposedly transcended, but has actually only repressed. I saw this most clearly in the rise of Nazism in Germany. How could a nation of such culture, such philosophy, such music and literature descend into such barbarism? The answer is the collective shadow. Germany had cultivated an identity of high culture, intellectual sophistication, and moral superiority. But beneath this cultivated surface, the shadow was accumulating. Resentment from World War I defeat, economic humiliation, wounded national pride, and all the primitive tribal instincts that civilization had papered over but never truly transformed. When Hitler came to power, he didn't introduce something foreign to the German psyche. He gave voice to the German shadow. He spoke the unspeakable, named the unnameable, and gave permission for the collective shadow to erupt. And when a collective shadow erupts, the result is genocide, war, and atrocity on a massive scale. This pattern repeats throughout history. The Crusades, the Inquisition, slavery, colonialism, mass purges, every form of collective violence emerges when a group shadow takes over while the group believes it's acting from the highest morality. The most dangerous people are not those who know they're doing evil. The most dangerous are those convinced they're doing good while acting from their shadow. The inquisitor-burning heretics believed he was serving God. The colonizer exploiting indigenous peoples believed he was bringing civilization. The totalitarian state murdering dissidents believes it's creating paradise. This is why I insisted that the great danger of our time is not evil people, but good people who don't know their own shadow. A person who knows they have destructive impulses can watch those impulses, can choose not to act on them. But a person who believes they are purely good, purely righteous, will do terrible things while maintaining a clear conscience. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we work with the shadow in practical terms? First, we must develop what I call psychological honesty. This means being willing to acknowledge traits in ourselves that contradict our self-image. It means paying attention to our emotional reactions, especially our strongest negative reactions to others. When you find yourself having an intense dislike for someone, ask yourself, what quality in them am I reacting to? Then ask, could I possibly have this quality in myself, even in a small or hidden way? The answer, uncomfortable as it may be, is usually yes. Second, we must pay attention to our slips of the tongue, our jokes, our fantasies, and our dreams. These are windows into the shadow. The things we laugh at in private, the thoughts we have that we immediately suppress, the impulses we feel but never act on. These are shadow contents seeking acknowledgement. Dreams are particularly valuable because the unconscious speaks directly in dreams, unfiltered by conscious censorship. I kept detailed dream journals throughout my life, and I encouraged all my patients to do the same. In dreams, the shadow often appears as a figure of the same sex as the dreamer, someone threatening or distasteful. Learning to recognize and dialogue with this figure is crucial. Third, we must practice what I called active imagination. This means allowing contents from the unconscious to surface, while maintaining enough consciousness to observe and interact with them. It's different from just fantasizing, because you remain aware that you're engaging with autonomous psychic contents, not merely daydreaming. In my practice, I would have patients sit quietly, allow an image or figure to emerge from their unconscious, and then engage with it. Ask it questions. Let it respond. Don't censor or direct the process. Simply observe and interact. Over time, this builds a conscious relationship with the unconscious, including the shadow. Fourth, we must engage in what I called shadow work through our relationships. Other people are mirrors for our shadow. The qualities we most admire and most despise in others are often projections of our own repressed traits. By examining our projections, by withdrawing them and acknowledging, this is actually something in me, we gradually integrate the shadow. This is difficult work. It requires tremendous honesty and courage. It means admitting to ourselves things we've spent our lives denying. It means accepting that we contain potentials for both great good and great evil. But the alternative is worse. An unacknowledged shadow doesn't disappear. It grows stronger, waits for moments of weakness, and then possesses us. The repressed always returns, usually at the worst possible moment. Now I want to tell you something that might surprise you. The shadow, properly understood and integrated, is not just a problem to be solved. It's a source of vitality, creativity, and authentic power. When I finally began to integrate my own shadow, I noticed something remarkable. I became more alive, more creative, more genuine. The energy I had been using to repress and deny parts of myself became available for living. The shadow contains not just our rejected darkness, but also our unlived life, our unused potentials. For many people, their greatest gifts are buried in the shadow because those gifts didn't fit the identity they constructed or the role society assigned them. A person raised to be intellectual and rational might have buried their emotional sensitivity and artistic creativity in the shadow. When they finally access these qualities, they discover a richness they never knew they possessed. Someone taught to always be strong and self-sufficient might have buried their vulnerability and need for connection in the shadow. When they finally allow themselves to need others, they discover the depth of intimacy possible. The shadow also contains what I called healthy aggression, the ability to assert boundaries, to say no, to fight for what matters. Many people, especially those raised to be nice and accommodating, have suppressed this quality. They become doormats, unable to protect themselves or stand up for their values. Integrating the shadow means reclaiming this healthy assertiveness. Moreover, confronting the shadow leads to genuine humility, not the false humility of denying our gifts, but the real humility of recognizing we contain both light and darkness. This makes us more compassionate toward others, less judgmental, more able to see the full humanity in everyone we meet. When you've faced your own capacity for cruelty, you can't self-righteously condemn the cruelty of others. When you've acknowledged your own shadow, you recognize it operating in the world without the need for projection and scapegoating. This is what I meant by individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all aspects of the psyche, including the shadow. An individuated person is not perfect. They're complete. They contain multitudes. They can hold the tension of opposites within themselves. My confrontation with the unconscious lasted intensely from 1913 to 1916, but in truth, it never really ended. Shadow work is not something you complete. It's a lifelong practice. Even after I emerged from my darkest period, even after I had formulated my theories and resumed my practice, I continued to encounter new aspects of my shadow. The unconscious is inexhaustible. There are always deeper layers, always new contents emerging. In my later years, I built a tower at Bollingen, a retreat where I could continue this inner work away from the demands of professional life. I worked with stone, carved wood, painted mandalas, all ways of giving form to unconscious contents, of making the invisible visible. I also traveled extensively, visiting traditional cultures in Africa, India, and North America. I wanted to see how other cultures related to the unconscious, to the shadow, to the dark aspects of human nature. What I found was that traditional societies often had far more sophisticated ways of working with the shadow than our modern rationalistic culture. They had rituals, ceremonies, myths, and practices that acknowledged the darkness and gave it appropriate expression. Warrior ceremonies allowed for controlled expression of aggression. Trickster myths acknowledged our capacity for deception and chaos. Initiation rituals involved confronting one's fears and shadows as a necessary step toward adulthood. Modern society, by contrast, has tried to eliminate the darkness entirely, to pretend we've transcended our primitive nature. But we haven't transcended it. We've just driven it underground where it festers and occasionally erupts in ever more destructive ways. Let me end where I began, with my own journey into darkness. That period of my life, from 1913 to 1916, was the most difficult and most important of my existence. I genuinely did not know if I would emerge from it sane. There were days when I wondered if I would end up institutionalized, another psychiatrist destroyed by his own mind. But I made a commitment to myself. I would go through this, not around it. I would face whatever emerged from the depths, no matter how terrifying. And I would document everything, because I sensed that what I was experiencing personally might have significance for understanding the human psyche universally. What I discovered changed the course of psychology and continues to influence how we understand the mind today. The shadow is now a recognized concept, though not everyone who uses the term understands its full implications. Here's what I want you to take from my story. You have a shadow. Everyone does. It's not a moral failing. It's a psychological fact. The question is not whether you have darkness within you. You do. The question is whether you'll acknowledge it, work with it, and integrate it, or whether you'll deny it and let it operate unconsciously, possessing you and projecting onto others. The path to wholeness doesn't go around the darkness. It goes through it. You must be willing to descend into your own depths, to face the parts of yourself you've rejected, to acknowledge the monsters that wear your face. This is not comfortable work. It will challenge everything you believe about yourself. It will force you to question your motives, admit your flaws, and recognize your capacity for both good and evil. But on the other side of this confrontation lies something precious: authenticity, vitality, compassion, and a kind of peace that comes from no longer being at war with yourself. In one of my visions during those dark years, I encountered a figure who told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "What you seek in the light cannot be found there. It waits for you in the darkness you fear. Go down, go deep. What seems like death is actually birth." This is the invitation I extend to you. Go down. Face your shadow. Discover what waits for you in your own darkness. It may be the most important journey you ever take. I am Carl Jung, and this is how I discovered the shadow self. Not in a book or a laboratory, but by plunging into the abyss of my own unconscious and returning with a map for others to follow. The darkness is not your enemy. It's the disowned part of yourself, waiting to be welcomed home.